So I'm going to talk about institutional factors that shape the digital labor platforms and its impact on working conditions in Croatia and Serbia. And with this intervention, I'm also hoping to bring into discussion some new insights and challenges in the regulatory debate around platform work. Because as we heard from Elisa, most of regulatory debates were how to combat changing workers from employees to self-employment, and that regulatory intervention has to combat this misclassification because workers are then denied labor and social protection benefits they are entitled to. However, there is a growing number of studies that show that there are diverse employment models, especially across Europe, that include self-employment, direct employment, employment by third parties, and even informal work. So that's kind of challenges more the regulatory context. I'm specifically interested in subcontracting because it's shown to be especially prevalent in Central and Eastern Europe, but it also appears in other European countries and globally in countries like China, Taiwan, and Ghana. My case focus is on examining the institutional factors that led to prevalence and its impact on working conditions in countries of Southeast Europe, Croatia and Serbia, in ride-hailing and food delivery sector. Methodologically, the study combines legal analysis with empirical data. So I have done a legal analysis of broad range of institutions that impact the emergence of subcontracting, its organizational forms and impact on employment models, such as product market regulation, business regulation, labor market regulation, and social policy regulation. And I have been very fortunate to be able to draw from interviews with platform workers that were very instructive in understanding which and to what extent and how these regulations interfere with platform work. So to begin with product market regulation, observing the impact and the role of product market regulation in transportation sector and food delivery sector, I have found that there is uneven impact. The key differences between the two sectors lie in the fact that road transportation regulation in both countries imposes market entry requirements in terms of licensing, qualifications, while there is no regulation in food delivery that imposes any market entry requirements. Also, another key difference between the two sectors regulation is that road transportation regulation directly interferes with employment relationship, namely the way taxi service is regulated in both Croatia and Serbia directly establishes in what forms taxi services can be performed. So they can be performed either by solo entrepreneur who is registered as a legal entity and has a proper license, or by employees of a licensed taxi company. So there already the transportation regulation provides for opportunity to be established as self-employed or through subcontract which platform companies have used. Again, such regulation does not exist in the food delivery sector. Another key difference is the state authority over these product market regulations. If we look in transportation sector, there is a clear one state authority over taxi services. So primarily the Ministry of Transportation has a sole authority. It has its own inspection bodies that can properly enforce the laws. When we look at food delivery sector, we see a fragmentation of state bodies and authorities and lack of coordination between these different state bodies really kind of prohibits the proper enforcement because we're talking about regulation of logistic companies, regulation of food safety, and so on. And lastly, the key difference in how these regulations impact the organizational model of platform and their employment model is whether they are powerful actors that can mobilize around this regulation. So in taxi regulation, we have strong incumbent actors, which are the traditional taxi association, but also powerful platform companies. Their struggle over interpretation of regulation has also caused divergent outcomes in these two countries. In Croatia, deregulation of road transportation service, and in Serbia, the defense of existing road transportation. But the fact that there are these actors that can question the implementation of regulation, no such actors exist in food delivery. Nobody that could even prompt either the enforcement of existing regulation or legal change. Next, if you look at business regulation, both countries have underdeveloped institutional support for entrepreneurship, which primarily is due to their historical legacies and transformational gaps in the process of institutional transformation during the transition period. So there are high administrative and financial burdens on becoming a solo entrepreneur. So basically, the institutional setting is not conducive to like flexible earning opportunities, because if you want to earn any money in any kind of side hustle or something like that, you still have to set up your own company, which then produces a continuous month-to-month administrative and financial burdens, because you have to pay tax, you have to keep books and things like that, which stands in stark contrast with the flexibility, unstableness, and transitory character of platform work. So therefore, local subcontractors kind of emerge as mediators between platforms' flexibility and institutional rigidity. But because local subcontractors took over this role of taking care of administrative and financial burdens, they also try to kind of play the institutional setting in trying to diminish those financial burdens. So here, the role of tax regime is also important, because one notable trend among local subcontractors in platform work in both countries is kind of navigating the tax regulation to avoid financial burdens. So what do is they either create multi-tier subcontracting chains or use different legal entities to avoid getting into higher tax brackets. So for example, the value-added tax exempts companies from paying the tax up to certain income threshold. So local subcontractors would then operate under one legal entity until they hit that threshold, close it, call it bankruptcy, declare insolvency, and start operating in another legal entity. This can cause negative consequences for workers, because some, not all, some subcontractors, when they close those subsidiaries, just don't pay workers the wages and social security contributions. The use of subcontractors also open a space for experimenting with various forms of work arrangements and essentially embedding platform work in existing quasi-formal and informal work segments. So at the beginning, when platform companies first started working in Croatia and Serbia, most work was informal. This has been sufficiently addressed by Croatian government with the combating of undeclared work, that now most of this work is becoming formal, while in Serbia, informal work is still rampant in food delivery sector, not in transportation sector. But when we look at formal work arrangements, we can also see patterns of misappropriations in order to cut some costs. And these patterns of misappropriation are dependent on the way national regulation legally constructs mostly flexible work contracts. So in Croatia, the most frequently used type of employment contract is part-time contract, because part-time employment contract under the Labor Act is very loosely defined, very close to 0-hour contract. So there is no legally prescribed minimum hours of work. And in practice, this translates to platform workers having contracts for 1 or 2 hours of work per week, when in reality, they work much longer hours. because flexible work arrangements in Serbia are more rigidly stipulated by the legislation, the most frequently used misappropriation is underreporting wages. So platform workers would have full-time employment contract, which stipulates minimum wage in accordance with the national minimum wage, and the rest platform workers get as envelope wages. So obviously this impacts their level of social benefits, pension, and other stuff. And lastly, also, another key part of regulation is social policy. So this acts as a really strong incentive towards formalizing or informalizing platform work. One of my interview participants said that the reason he has an employment contract is because he needed it to get his child into state kindergarten. So he was like, oh, I'm willing to formalize my work with my subcontractor because I can gain access to some social benefits. Unlike him, there is a very big population of war veteran beneficiaries in Croatia working on platform work, or students working on platform work. Both receive some benefits from the state, or in case of students, it's the student housing, student meal plans, which in case they formalize their work, they would not be entitled to. So they actively pursue and try to find subcontractors willing to take them on informally. In concluding, so we see that platform companies can cut costs in various ways, that the strategy is to externalize the workforce, either by directly contracting employed platform workers or through subcontracting. And both can be observed as examples of what Judy Fudge calls fragmenting of work or fissuring of work in Davis-Vail terms. The choice of fissuring is strongly linked with institutional factors, as I just portrayed, that institutional factors force platforms to adapt and change their organizational model. The fact that in both countries we are observing both self-employed and subcontracting models kind of talks to the hybrid and inconsistent nature of institutional arrangement in transitioning countries, which results in this hybrid nature of platform work as well, where we have these local subcontractors as important mediators between flexibility promoted by platforms and rigid regulatory environment. Overall, the findings support the differential embeddedness approach to the labor platforms, but also question this idea that ideological power and discursive power of entrepreneurship that platform companies have used in order to transform workers into self-employed, but we see in certain institutional settings, those ideological concepts cannot be that easily transplanted. And going back to the regulatory debate, I think we have seen that platform companies do not only interact with product market regulation or employment regulation, their interaction with the regulatory environment is quite broad and complex. So that kind of stresses the need to also broaden the regulatory objective about regulating platform work and seeing how can we really make platform companies responsible for workers in any kind of organizational form they take. Thank you.